So as we give people an opportunity to file into the room, I'm just going to go ahead and make a quick announcement regarding the sound system. I know some people have been with us in this space before, some have not. We have these handy new microphones and a cloud sound system. We've tried to distribute microphones around the room. If you are going to speak, you'll need to hit the button on the right side that looks like a little person with sound coming out. The red light will turn on, and that means that your mic is active and you're able to speak over the sound system. Please be sure that you are speaking into your microphone so that the individual who helps us with minutes is able to hear you clearly. If you do have any problems, you can adjust the volume on the right, on the side panel. And also sometimes you may need to press in on the base of your microphone to make sure it's connected well. Just wanted to make sure we covered that before we get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. We've got a full agenda today. So my name is Diane Fleet, and we will open up this meeting of the LFUCG's Homeless Prevention and Intervention Board and also the Lexington-Fayette County Continuum of Care. But first, we're going to do a call to order and do a roll call.
All right, calling us to order at 1:33 p.m. Starting the roll call, Joy Andrade is excused. Amanda Bryant is excused. Chris Clark.
Here.
For roll call, we would appreciate it, yes. Bruce Davis.
Here. Present.
Diane Fleet.
Present.
Janice James is excused. T.C. Johnson. Kathy Plowman is running late, but she will be with us momentarily. Bo Revlett.
Here.
Liz Sheehan.
Here.
Alicia Branham is excused. And Lella Still.
Here.
Thank you. And I appreciate everyone working with me. I know it's a little awkward and hard for us to get used to.
I think next on our agenda is we're going to do an approval of minutes. So would you all like to take a little time to look at July 13th's minutes and see if there's any corrections or comments? Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you so much. Next on our agenda, I believe, is the public and partner comments. Is that correct? We must do a vote first.
No, because we got a motion and a second, so we need to have the full board vote.
Sorry. I'll learn this Robert's rules, that darn Robert. I never liked Robert. May we have a vote, please? All those in favor of saying aye? Any nays? Abstentions? We have approval. So we can do the next thing?
Now public comment.
Okay. Now we're going to do public and partner comments for issues on the agenda. It's a quiet group. I'm really trying to have Jeff not speak all day, so I'm just going to ramble a little. So we're good? All right. I think next on our agenda, we have Charlie Lanter talking about a housing grant.
Is this working? Oh, yeah. Oh, my. Is this what y'all want me to do? I would normally, go to the front of the class, but could I just sit here? Is that good? Okay. Just making sure. I won't take a lot of your time. I know y'all probably have a long meeting and a lot to cover. I think everyone here knows me, but if not, I'm Charlie Lanter. I'm the Commissioner of Housing Advocacy and Community Development, which ties together our homeless office, but also our grants division and several others that deal with housing. And so I wanted to make you all aware of a project we're working on, so that if you want to provide some information to us, or if we ask you for information, you'll know what we're doing. It's really exciting, actually. So HUD has issued an RFP for, well, an OFO for a grant opportunity called Pro Housing, and the Pro stands for Preventing and Reducing Obstacles. And so this is a new initiative from the Biden administration. They actually call it the YIMBY grant. Yes, in my backyard. And what it's supposed to do is empowers communities to take a look at themselves, identify barriers to the development of affordable housing in your community, and then build a plan to address those barriers. It is a 5-year grant. We can request up to $10 million. So it's a pretty big deal. You know, we won't get the 10. That'll be like LA or somebody, but we'll do pretty good. And what we would ultimately do is create an entire program. We're tentatively calling it Housing Forward Lexington, in which we have someone go through all the elements that touch the actual development of affordable housing. So I'm talking about building inspection and planning and zoning and all of those processes, and examine and determine where do we have barriers in our community, both in the government and outside of the government, and then how can we come together and remove some of those barriers. Because what I've been telling people all along is, the affordable housing crisis we have, we need to fund it, but you can't buy your way out of it. There's going to be other things we have to do besides fund the affordable housing fund. So one good example of the kind of thing they're looking for is, examining your permitting process and how many days it takes to issue a permit, waiving certain fees and costs associated with the development if it's going to be affordable housing. And I know you all are typically dealing with a more vulnerable population than what a lot of our affordable housing developments do, but I suspect as we go through this that we're all going to agree that one of our big problems is lack of permanent supportive housing. And so we're going to be looking at what are the barriers to that and how do we address those. So I'll be reaching out to some of you individually. Some of you may have already looking for data and information to support our grant. We have to obviously establish the need in our community, which we know is there, but we got to write about it. And any feedback you have, look for some meetings I'm going to set up for people to have an opportunity to give us suggestions on what this should look like. We basically have to identify what we think the barriers are to affordable housing in our community and start to write about what we think they are and how we would address them. Do you have to answer any questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I appreciate this work and you looking into this opportunity. For a few months back, we had a council presentation about a study of our planning process. So I will be interested to see if any of the work that you're doing around this overlaps with some of the findings there on just general barriers in the development process and things that slow that process down, because I think there are efficiencies that we can look for, particularly around affordable housing. So
yeah, I agree. One example of a problem we have is we worked recently to develop a plan for our winter weather shelter, and the folks who were in that group with us can tell you that our biggest challenge was finding out where we were allowed to put it. We built a map of all the zones that allow a community center, which in our zoning lingo, that's what they would qualify a homeless shelter under. And there were 5 places that were really viable, 5 to 10. But then once you factor in cost and availability, we settled on one, and it took 3 months. So that's an issue. And we'll look at things like, some communities are doing away with R1 zones. That's something that I'm not saying that will come out of this for sure. I'm just saying that's one of the things that you would take a look at. There was one other example I was going to give, and now I've forgotten. We did look into waiving tap fees for affordable housing developments, and a lot of departments shot us down. So you can't inequitably apply those for some reason.
Commissioner, I don't know if you said this, you may have, but what is the time frame on this grant? When would the application?
I did
when
not,
would
so
funding?
that's a good question.
Okay.
It's due October 30th, and they said the awards will be made in January, and then it's a 5-year time. So $1 to $10 million over 5 years. Right now, the way I'm designing it, we'd probably hire a staff person to coordinate it, and then use some contractors. Now I remember what I was going to say for Councilmember Sheehan. The timing of this works really great for us in terms of crafting an application because of the work we're doing on the urban services boundary. And we also just are about to fund a major study of our affordable housing needs. And so we'll get all that right about the time we would start this grant. And so then it's like, okay, well, now what do you do with it? You got all this data, you got potentially land. And so I'm able to write in the grant narrative, hey, glad you asked. It's a great time for us to have this grant, you know. So it all kind of comes together nicely. Now, they're only making 10 awards nationally, so I don't make any promises on whether we get it. But what I've told everyone is the process we're going through to plan for it and develop it is going to produce outcomes we're going to want to use anyway, whether we get the grant or not.
Any further questions for the commissioner? Thank you. Next on our agenda is Joy Andrade, is the chair of the Data and Systems Integration Committee report.
She's not with us today, so Marissa's going to fill in on
Yep.
this.
I'm happy to report on that. That Data and Systems Integration Committee meeting occurred on August 2nd at the Don Ball Campus Center. We discussed our fiscal year 22 system performance measures, both in comparison to the previous fiscal year as well as the national average. We also took that information and that data and tried to think through some strategies specifically centering around those system performance measures and how they relate to things in much broader, such as the COC competition. We talked about specific strategies regarding income, returns to homelessness, as well as just the number of folks who are within our homeless system. We also discussed our housing triage system and received a community or coordinated entry report and had some general HMIS announcements, such as the system interface changes. Everybody should have already seen those, as well as the URL changes to HMIS. So be sure to make sure that your bookmarks are correct. The new user group training that occurs every single month. If you need a one of your staff or a peer to be trained, please notify me. And we have one more end user group that will be taking place in November at this time. And then lastly, our next meeting will be October 4th at 1:30 at the Don Ball Campus Center.
Thank you so much. Any questions regarding data? All right. Our next on our list is Liz Sheehan, who is the chair of Program Performance and Evaluation.
Thank you. We had our last meeting in August at the Don Ball Campus Center, and it's we called the order at 1:32. We had 5 presentations. The first was from Arbor Youth Services on their street outreach and drop-in center. Each presenter presented targets and performance metrics, and then we had discussion after. So for theirs, the discussion centered around some of the change in the rules for the center around consequences for action, and we had a really good discussion about how they were lowering barriers there in the center. Then in a Community Action Council, we heard about the Transitional Housing Pilot Program. This was funded through the American Rescue Plan Act. Some of the discussion for that particular program was around whether they lease or bought the houses, and they did buy them. And once the program for the transitional housing is over, they're developing a process for how to rent the houses. And then we talked about factors influencing how many households they served. The third presentation was the Lexington Rescue Mission Street Outreach Program, and part of the discussion for them was about their ability to help get IDs issued and what some of the challenges were that they have been facing. And some of the challenge there was just the funding source opened up late in the year, so they didn't even have access to the funds at that point or earlier. And then having trouble having people show up to appointments or having the complete paperwork that is needed were some of the other challenges there. The fourth program presented was the Mountain Comprehensive Care Center, the Transition in Place program. This was a ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act program as well. They used a master lease model, I guess is the term there. And this was particularly for people who had barriers to shelter with emphasis on pets and intensive case management. And this was designed to have them transition to a lease into their name after 3 months. This funding has been terminated early due to some challenges, and one of those was the master lease, and then the shortness of the program of being only 3 months. There was some challenges getting people into with that lease in their name in that short time period. So those funds are in the process of being transferred over to another program. Then the fifth program was New Beginnings, the housing navigation for those with SMI, and a lot of the discussion for this program was around collaboration, and they're seeking more referrals. So we had a conversation particularly around opportunities for referrals from Eastern State. When we meet again next, it will be October 18th at 1:30 at the Don Ball Campus Center, and we'll have presentations from Arbor Youth Services, Lexington Fayette Urban County Housing Authority for the COC and the LHA Supportive Housing Grant, and then from New Beginnings as well. And that's everything.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Councilperson Sheehan? Thank you. Next on the list is Bo, who's Chair of Advocacy Issues and Programs Committee Report, and I think he's also going to discuss the source of income discrimination letter.
Yes. Thank you. So first I will give the full report from our meeting on August 28th. We discussed new business. First, we went through program standards review calendar, which was voted on by the COC and approved. The first meeting, we're going to start having quarterly meetings to review the different program standards for the different programs. So the first one is for rapid rehousing. That's going to be this month in 2 weeks from today on September 27th at 1:30 in the same room. And then the other dates for those are November 29th for permanent supportive housing, March 27th for street outreach, and May 22nd for emergency shelter. And next on the agenda was a discussion about source of income discrimination, but I'll come back to that last because we have some action items for it. And then we also heard a report from Tay Henderson at Lighthouse Ministries, who talked about their Clean Start program, talked about needing donations of clothes that can be dropped off at 190 Spruce Street, shared that walk-ins are welcome there, have shower availability, and you can call at 859-303-7014. We also heard a report from TC Johnson, a board member, and works at FCPS, providing info now that school has started on some of their programs and some of their challenges. And some of the things that she talked about were transitional readiness programs for kids leaving high school, and a crock pot project where they're donating a crock pot plus $100 to eligible families, and some other things that you can get with TC to hear some more info about and also see in the minutes. And then we also in new business, we talked briefly about a eviction expungement campaign that the Coalition for the Homeless in Louisville is working on, and that they're trying to get the state legislature to pass, that there should be another bill pre-filed for the next legislative session. And there was also some discussion of landlord mitigation funds in myky.info under new business. And then under continuing business, we heard a report on the ongoing work around lived experience subcommittee. We had a first meeting where the aim was to collect feedback from people with lived experience, had really good engagement and feedback. There were around a dozen people in attendance, and we had a discussion for around an hour, had those in attendance sign a letter of support for the COC application, and laid out the plan for what future meetings of that subcommittee will look like. And then Marissa gave a program standards update, and the main thing under that is that rapid rehousing providers should have received an email with updated standards. We also talked about emergency shelter standards, which the report there was that we were awaiting progress on the winter weather program because that would impact the standards. And then we talked about IDs for those experiencing homelessness. One update there, one promising update is that the cost was originally $10 per ID and now it's down to $5. And we discussed ongoing barriers with that, namely that we are issuing a lot of IDs, but a lot of people are not being able to take those letters to get them redeemed and actually get their IDs. And so just for the amount of letters we're distributing, we're not seeing as many IDs. And then the last thing that we discussed was Dale Chapman taking the lead on National Homeless Persons Remembrance Day in Lexington. And the next meeting for the advocacy committee is October 25th. And then we're circling back around to source of income discrimination. The primary action item out of the committee was that we there is a letter that was distributed with this board packet to express support from the continuum of care for a ban on source of income discrimination to the Urban County Council. This is something that the continuum has discussed over a time frame dating back to at least mid last year, and we sent an initial letter to council on November 30th of last year, and now the council will be hearing a presentation on October 10th during the Public Safety and Social Services Committee on this, so we thought that it would make sense to send an updated letter, and so there was a subcommittee that met to draft this letter. So thank you to Christina from New Beginnings, as well as Isora and Alicia from Lexington Rescue Mission, and Jeff, who helped, and then Diane sent an email, and Jackie Long from Mountain Comprehensive also sent an email with some information. So this was many hands made light work on this. And so that letter was sent around. I do want to just point out there were a couple of typos in it. So before we vote, a couple of short changes. I added a period at the end of one sentence that lacked a period. And I had a typo where I said shared or reported instead of shared or report. So those would be updated in any final motion on the letter. And then also there was one sentence that was passive voice that I changed to active voice. So it was during COC meetings, this problem has been repeatedly discussed, and I changed that to members of the COC have repeatedly discussed this problem at meetings. So yeah, is there any discussion on the letter that was circulated, or questions or comments?
Well, this is just a typo piece. I thought that I read the letter and I underlined pieces of it. I found it fascinating, even though it's things that we experienced too. I could see similar things that we emailed from other agencies. But I know our development person would be really upset with me if I did not tell you that Greenhouse 17 is with a capital H and it's all together. She's very particular about that. So it's Greenhouse 17 all together, but the H is capital. So thank you for that.
So the 17 is the same word.
It's all, yeah, same
right.
word with a capital A. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say that I appreciate all the efforts that you and others in the continuum made. The only thing that I'm going to just raise is, do we think there's any concerns about the length of the letter? Because I want to make sure that if we get something before the council, that they're actually going to read it and get the takeaway that we desire.
What do you, not to put you on the spot, but what do you think about it, Councilperson Sheehan, knowing your fellow folks?
Well, there's two of us here. Councilmember Plumman's here as well.
I saw you walk in. Hey, Kathy, sorry.
I'm kind of mixed on it because I do understand wanting to present all of the information. And I think the statements from individual organizations is really powerful. So I'm okay with the length.
Oh, I forget about that all the time. Yeah, I'm okay with the letter. However, I'm on this, so I would read it. But unfortunately, I'm not sure you're going to get everybody's attention on that. It is long, and we have been receiving emails opposing this. You think that'd be more reason for us, but we just get so much stuff to read that maybe you could just do bullet points, so that the flow doesn't look like it's 2 pages. I mean, that's just a suggestion. I mean, we're vested, but there's some, they're not going to read it. But they are reading the other side.
I wonder if
Because they're short and sweet.
I wonder if a suggestion would be to have a shortened version, just that's the first page, with, that references the other items. So they're still included, but then are like a reference after the first page.
Yeah, my potential suggestion was going to be maybe we could keep the points that we want in the letter and then maybe like move the quotes to like a addendum, potentially. Just a thought. I'm totally comfortable with what the membership would want to do.
Yeah, and just to give a breakdown of like what is in the link, that's like, so it's a 5-page letter. The first page and a half is just like basically a summary of what the continuum is for, anyone who doesn't know. And then the next 2 pages is quotes from providers, basically, plus some data that Jeff has provided. And then so that gets us up to 3.5 pages. And so then the last page and a half is like national data, backing up why this would be helpful. So I would be happy to work on like a 1-page thing at the start, like executive summary, which feels a little intense for a letter, but one thing I got a suggestion that it might be helpful to include just a sentence when we're introducing the continuum about how many people are served by the continuum every year. If you could, Jeff or Marissa, provide that.
Yeah, we can provide that. We would just have to, obviously pull that data to make sure we're being accurate, but we can get that.
Could we? So it sounds to me like the proposal on the table is to have this letter and also an additional 1-page executive summary that we send. Could we vote on that proposal?
So this would be since it's going to be coming from the continuum, this would be a full membership vote.
I'll make that motion. So for all those in agreement of kind of an executive summary in the front page of this 5-page letter that's going to be shared with council regarding source of income discrimination, may I have all those in favor say aye? All those who disagree say nay. Any abstentions? The ayes have it.
All right, looks like I would be next on the agenda for a while. So we're gonna get comfortable.
Can I ask one quick question? So what would be the distribution of this? So if you're going to do the executive summary to add to this, and then what is your timing on completing that and then delivering it to council? Because I think this is in our next social services and public safety meeting, which is mid-October.
Yeah, I want to, realistically, I'll be able to finish the executive summary by early next week, and then send an email sometime next week. I think when we sent it last November, Jeff sent the email from the continuum, but I think that is what we did. But that's the plan. We also had discussed, and I'm going to follow up with the people who had volunteered for this, but some service providers had discussed asking a set of council members to have a meeting where they could directly hear from council members, where we could also bring the letter, and so that, for people who aren't going to sit down and read 6 pages or whatever, they can also just have a longer form conversation with some of the people in this room and some of the folks who have contributed to this.
And I would just remind people, at our committee meetings, we don't have public comment, but you do have work sessions and our regular council meetings where you can have public comment time as well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding of the fastest timeline on this would be it's heard at committee and then it's moved to work session. I think there's a work session either the following week or the week after, and then there would need to be 2 hearings at full council meetings. Is that correct?
Generally, what would happen is at the committee meeting, you would have the presentation and any action would be decided by that committee. Then that is reported out to the full council generally the next month. So it's typically whenever the next meeting happens, the report out for the last meeting is that work session that day. So there's a month and that's to give time for the public to learn about it and understand it and give public comment. And then once it goes to that work session report out, that's where the full council votes to move it to the full council meeting on the docket, and that's where you get your first and second reading. So that's the kind of timeline.
All right. So moving forward to the encampment SOP review report. This was included in the board packet. I'm going to really focus on the summary information per our previous discussions, trying to provide some kind of summary aggregate data for us to look at. This would be our first report out since this was requested of us, so I'll keep this running forward. We'll look at both within the period from the last board meeting to the current one. I'll give those that data, those statistics up front, and then we'll also include a running total for the fiscal year. So this is going to cover any kind of encampments that LFUCG had a role in clearing from the start of the fiscal year, July 1, through last week when the board packet was sent out. There were a total of 6 locations that were cleaned, and there were only 4 of those that were unique locations. 3 of those locations or cleanups involved no contacts made and no active camp identified. Additionally, there were 2 cleanups that were just routine cleanups of a designated posted emphasis area. Of the other locations where we did have contact, that would be 1 location and 3 individuals were located there, 2 of which engaged in services and have been permanently housed. The other individual stated that they were working with another organization and declined outreach services and voluntarily relocated. Total cost for this period would be $16,925 with an average cost per cleanup of $2,820.83. The individual locations are listed out. Location number 1 would have been 1 location that constituted 2 cleanups. Any questions regarding the encampment report?
I just want to say I really appreciate this new summary data. So thank you for pulling that together.
Yeah, and it'll help me as well. I have to give this information annually to the council, so it kind of keeps me so that I don't have to try to calculate this at the end of the fiscal year. So thank you for that suggestion. All right, moving into the OHPI Director's Report. First is going to be just a review of where we are at with our budget. So again, for fiscal years 22, 23, and 24, our Innovative and Sustainable Solutions Fund rolled onto ARPA funding. Fiscal year 22, we are very close to being able to close out all projects that were contracted have closed, and so we are going to have a couple of amounts here that we will need to discuss what we want to do with moving forward. That's going to be the basically, it's going to be the racial equity analysis, that balance of 32,000 and some change. The amount with the payee program that actually has been included in an invoice that was processed this week. So that will bring that balance on that purchase order down to 0. And the only other remaining funds are the funds that are technically not in a purchase order but paid out for state ID assistance as it is rendered. And so we do not plan to do any movement with those funds. We're going to keep that remaining amount, and then we will use that until it's exhausted. And we've already talked about dedicating some funds out of fiscal year 24 for that same purpose. But again, we'll have the 32,000 remaining from the racial equity analysis to reallocate to another project. Fiscal year 23, this one, we have several items that have already been completed. That would be the Street Outreach 2.0 funding, the HMIS subsidy. So there's a small balance there since we did not use all 40,000. And also the marketing and communications campaign has closed out, and the COC supplemental NOFO grant consulting, which was used last year, still in process, is going to be the onboarding curriculum for case managers, and we just established a new purchase order for the payee program. Our plan at this point is that we are looking at trying to potentially transition that service over to community and resident services internally within LFUCG. I've held meetings with Danielle Sanders' office and Welcome House to talk about that potential transition. We're going to come together around the end of the year just to see where we are at in terms of community and resident services staffing and their ability to start maybe taking on some of those clients. And if needed, we would be looking to include any additional staffing needs in next year's budget request. But right now, everybody feels like it would be feasible to potentially close this out at the end of the fiscal year. If we were to do that, then on fiscal year 24, we would end up with some funds that we could reallocate towards another purpose. We've already paid our HMIS subsidy and contracted Street Outreach 3.0. The RFP for landlord engagement and housing navigation, I'm trying to get to purchasing hopefully by the end of the week. The one that I've held on for just a second is the low barrier interim housing, because we have, as part of our winter weather response, we're looking at doing a small amount of funding for motel rooms that would be for those that don't really meet the spirit of our congregate low barrier winter shelter. That's going to be something like 10 to 20 households at a time that could potentially be served. We're really targeting those like the elderly, disabled, those, for example, who have like mobility issues that might prevent them from being able to stay in that setting. A much smaller scale motel program with the majority of our population being served in the congregate shelter. That RFP is going to be advertised tomorrow and will be open through the end of September. It will be a fairly quick turnaround, about a 2.5 week process. I didn't want to put these RFPs out at the same time because I didn't want there to be confusion about them being similar projects that we were trying to RFP out at the same time. Otherwise, the other budget information that we'll cover is the Mountain Comprehensive Care Center Transition in Place project. This project was terminated and wrapped up around the end of June. It had a balance of $840,000 and a little bit of change. There's currently a plan to try to move that to another project within the homelessness system. That budget amendment is in process. We're looking at potentially using that to fund our winter weather response. Any questions regarding the budget update? All right. If not, I wanted to go ahead and just remind everyone that we had passed our governance charter at the last board meeting. That governance charter update specified that the Continuum of Care Board or designee would be responsible for identifying the individuals that we wanted to recommend for appointment to the board. And so having us all together, wanted the board to go ahead and start thinking about what we want that process to look like. I think it would potentially be burdensome to try to bring the entire board together to identify those individuals from the applications that we receive. So I didn't know if you all wanted to look at making a subgroup within the board, or if you would potentially want to designate other persons from the membership to serve for this purpose. But wanted to go ahead and start some conversation so that we can potentially pull together a plan and quickly move to try to vote on that and fill that vacancy so it doesn't remain open for an excessively long time. Any thoughts from the board on that?
I would be happy with a subcommittee, and it could be, you know, someone from the board or multiple people from the board, and then also maybe a few members from the wider COC.
Yeah, I like the idea of a mix. I think that could be really helpful, so that way we are ensuring that the spirit of the COC having the ability to recognize who they want to serve would be very, very helpful. Bo, did you have thoughts?
I agree.
All right. So from the board, would there be any individuals that would want to volunteer to serve on that subcommittee?
I could serve on that.
And would the subcommittee just, anytime there's a vacancy, meet once, or what's the, expectation?
Yeah, so I think we would, since it tends to happen very staggered, usually those terms are staggered intentionally. Like right now, if we were to fill this vacancy, I don't think we have another one until well into 2024. So we would just pull it together as needed, kind of similar to what the Program Performance and Evaluation Committee does when we have funding opportunities that are available. We have some of those closed meetings outside of our regularly established meetings when we have funds that are available to make those funding recommendations. So I think our next steps would be to go ahead and identify a target number of persons so that we can go ahead and work to recruit individuals for those slots. And then we would need to make sure that that was approved by the board as a whole as to what our plan or process is going to be for that. Technically, I mean, the governance charter established gives the board the authority to approve and select those members either on their own or through a designee. But I think if we're going to outline a process, we'd probably be best served to have a formal vote on it.
Yeah, I'd be willing to serve on that. I'd also be interested in someone from the lived experience subcommittee being able to be on this.
just thinking of the numbers and voting, I think it should be potentially an odd number of people in the subcommittee, obviously, but then I think there should be more members outside of the board than the board members. So if we have 2, then I think maybe 3 people from outside of the board.
Yeah. I was
would be
also thinking
appropriate.
logistically a odd number would serve us best. We don't want to continually come up against a situation where we might be evenly split. Right. I'd be glad to go ahead and take some of this feedback and kind of draft it into a proposal and get with those of you who have expressed an interest for your input, and then we can put something before the rest of the group.
Jeff, I was gonna ask, are there already any individuals that have expressed interest, or would this committee would be about the recruitment part too?
So where we have that dual designation of also being the HPI board, the process right now would be that we would have applications that are collected through LFUCG's website on an ongoing basis, and they retain those. Like if we selected one individual and didn't select the others, they're not going to just throw those applications out, so we can still go back to them and consider them when there's another vacancy that's available. We also have the ability to encourage someone to apply that we think would be a good fit for the board. So anytime we can pull those applications through the mayor's office, and then we would put them before this subcommittee to review and hold a meeting, most likely by Zoom for convenience, to discuss and determine who out of the pool of applicants that we would like to move forward with. Other questions regarding our starting a process for this? All right. So if not, the next item on our agenda, I'm just going to give a little bit of background on. So we have Steve Polston and Jenny Zamora with the New Life Day Center here with us today. Through the course of the last several months, we've been working to talk with the New Life Day Center about how we can support them in being able to restore their normal operating hours. Prior to the pandemic, they were remaining open until approximately 4:30 in the afternoon. And obviously, for a lot of us, COVID-19 caused a lot of changes logistically, operationally. And so at present, they are only operating until approximately 12:30 Monday through Friday, and then their Saturday hours. So some of the needs that we have seen in the community are things like when there is inclement weather, if it's not during an overnight period when individuals might be able to access overnight shelter, that there might be a need for people to be able to go somewhere to get out of the extreme weather and the elements. But additionally, they have a greater capacity to be able to permanently change someone's situation if they have longer hours and are potentially able to offer more services. So Commissioner Lanter and I approached them and had some conversations about what it would take to be able to get them to extend those hours. And in having those discussions, we saw that there were some opportunities for us to also look at some other unmet needs. So I'll start this conversation by saying that a portion of this funding that we are looking at potentially being able to provide to them is not coming from this board. It would be coming from the general fund. Originally, Catholic Action Center had proposed to do a mobile shower station called the Dignity Station. They are still pursuing that. However, they are pursuing that with private funding, and we have gotten consent to move that money to potentially fund New Life Day Center. The other proposal that they had, other than just adding some additional staffing to be able to operate extended hours, was that they wanted to make some improvements to their property. And that was the piece of this that I wanted to potentially bring to the board for consideration. I felt like it met the spirit of the Innovative and Sustainable Solutions Fund. And what they're looking to do is they're looking to put a roof on the rear of their property that would provide shade. Right now, if you travel past the New Life Day Center on a hot day, you're likely going to see folks moving around their building to try to catch what shade they can off of that building, to have an area that's shaded to rest in. In addition to the roof, they are looking to install things like picnic tables and benches, put some planters and things out there to make it an inviting and friendly space that people actually want to be in. But then beyond that, they also are looking at potentially putting in some portable toilets, a portable hand washing station, and that was the piece that I thought really kind of spoke to this population and this fund. I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with the fact that those that are in an unsheltered situation don't have a lot of publicly accessible bathrooms, particularly in the downtown area. I know that New Life themselves directly receives a lot of concerns or complaints about people, for example, going to the bathroom outdoors in the neighborhood. I received this kind of complaint not just around their location, but in other areas. LFUCG does have some plans to look at things like putting in something like a self-washing bathroom in Phoenix Park, but that's going to be a little bit down the road. It's not going to be instant. So they have provided us with an overall budget of what it would cost to do both the staffing and operational cost, as well as to add these additional features to their property. Because of the amount of time that has already passed in the fiscal year, what we were really looking at is potentially reducing this amount by the months of July, August, and September, with a potential start date of October 1. And then the amount of the Dignity Station funding was $79,405. So after making those deductions, the remainder or gap amount is $75,554. Which would be the additions to the outdoor space and just a little contribution towards those operational costs. So the ask that would be before the board today would be, if you were to vote on this today and approve this potential funding, then combined we would be able to help the New Life Day Center extend their hours and also add these additional features for our population. So I would go ahead, and this would be something that would need a board vote. This is something that is a little bit higher dollar amount than we would typically do outside of an RFP process. I have talked to procurement about that, and as a board-controlled fund, this board would have the ability to vote to approve that without a formal RFP. The other thought being that technically this amount of funding would not be sufficient for another organization to start an entire day center. We would look and work with the New Life Day Center to find sustainable funds that they could transition to starting July 1 of 24. So this would be to get their operational cost for the current fiscal year and add these features.
Did you say that they're going to stay up until 5? Is that what you said?
It would be 8 a.m. to 4:30
4:30.
Monday through Friday, and then their Saturday hours of 8 a.m. to noon. And they're also welcome and prepared to answer questions that the board might have.
Okay. Thank you. Do you need a motion? Anybody else have any questions?
I have one question about the funding. So would this funding come from the 32,000 remaining from the past year, the fiscal year 22, and then the remainder would come from the funds that we have in the?
That is a very good question. To avoid the use of ARPA funds, which would add additional burdens to them as federal funds for documentation and processes, we actually have a historical balance still remaining of just over $95,000. I have moved that to our current fiscal year so that we can use that for whatever purpose, but this would be the historical rolling balance of the 1145 fund or the Innovative and Sustainable Solutions Fund. We had used $100,000 of that for last year's winter weather response, and the other portion, obviously, if we were not to use at some point, I think we definitely need to determine a cause to use it for this fiscal year. We would potentially, be at jeopardy of losing those funds if it's not eventually expended.
I just had a question. Maybe I missed it in the information. On an average day, how many clients are you serving? People serve on average day?
Say around 100.
And I should also note that the plan would be for the bathrooms and hand washing station to be located outside of their fence so that it would be available after hours and not just during their open hours. And these costs, this budget would also include security that will monitor the property several times during the evening and also be available to take calls if there were issues that they needed to respond to. So there would be some oversight, but it would be something that would be available outside of their open hours.
Is this one time or ongoing?
So for us, this would be a one-time cost. We're funding the cost that would largely be the improvements or one-time capital expenses. A little bit of it would be considered operational since it's things like the servicing of the porta potties, getting them cleaned routinely, and the rental fees there. And then we would be seeking to roll them on to another source of funding after this fiscal year. So it would be, for us, right now on the floor, a one-time.
Got it. Okay, thank you, Steve. And just you said we typically wouldn't do this level of funding without an RFP. That's what you said, right?
Just general LFUCG, if it was general fund, for example, we usually wouldn't pursue that level of funding without an RFP process. However, procurement has said that since this is a board-controlled fund, this is something that the board could ultimately vote for.
Right. And what do we think are, I'm also curious, I'd also be curious if there's other board thoughts on this, but what do we think are the advantages of doing this without having an RFP? I think it would be great to fund the New Life Day Center, but just like curiosity around like process and
Yeah.
transparency.
So I think the biggest impact would just be probably around the timeline, that this would be something that if we were able to vote on today, we would potentially be able to get them under agreement as early as October 1 so that this resource would be available going into the winter season. If we were to do an RFP for this, we would, obviously have some additional time built in that would have to go for putting the bid out, keeping it open, reviewing it, and then the additional timeline for it to go through council.
I do have a question. Out of the clients that you are serving, are there any families or clients with children?
No, typically we serve adult men and women. It's about 85% men, 15% women.
I was just wondering, what was the additional funds you said you'd seek after ours kind of runs out? And is it likely that they would secure that, or how likely? I'm just wondering, are we going to start a service that may end up being stopped in 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. So one potential source that could be pursued is extended social resource funding, and that would go under the shelter category, and we would seek to make that a shelter category instead of strictly just overnight emergency shelter.
I know we're not meant to speak during this meeting, but did this go through a committee before?
So this is the first time it's being presented to the board.
Okay.
Yeah, just to follow up on my question, is our belief that even if we did put out an RFP, New Life would be the only people who would apply for it likely, or do we have any expectations or thoughts around that?
More than likely, that's my thought. I can't be certain. I don't know who else would necessarily have the interest, the space or capacity to do this. But again, I can't say with 100% certainty.
I would just say too, I'm always a little hesitant about any kind of fast tracking things, but at the same time, I know that this is a service that a lot of agencies probably utilize too. So it's kind of like a this and that, even though, so I know that a lot of our folks, a lot of victims of domestic violence are, throughout the day are needing services. I was interested in that question of 20 to 25% are single women that I know sometimes when I'm kind of roaming around downtown, I recognize some of the ladies that are downtown. And so to a degree, you all having this is a benefit to me, or to our program and the services we do. So I'm really intrigued with this, and particularly with the weather coming on and the expedition or expediting this. So I tend to be leaning towards this myself, even though I'm always a little hesitant of speeding process up as well. But I like the nimbleness sometimes of a board just making a decision of what's sort of in the value of the innovative solutions thoughts.
Do we need a motion?
If we're going to pursue a vote, then yeah, we'll need a motion.
I didn't think one had been made. I
Again,
hadn't had
I'm
much
open to
sleep.
whatever conversation that we feel like we need to have today.
Well, to get this on the floor, I would move approval of the proposed budget for New Life Day Center.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. All those on the board in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes.
I wanted to ask one more question of Stephen. I'm sorry, what was your name too? Jenny. Nice to meet you, Jenny. What's your, could you all just say something about how important it would be to get the money quickly? Because I think I'm with Diane, I appreciate the opportunity for us to be able to be nimble and respond to the needs that exist in the community right now. And I value transparency and adequate process. So if you all could just say a little bit about what you would see as a benefit to y'all of getting it more quickly.
I think that it's just more quick.
One of the things this will do will get the people off the street. And there's gatherings. I don't know if you're familiar with the term gatherings. If there's nowhere to go, then there's gatherings. And on the sidewalk and in the neighborhood and on the corner, at the cemetery, at the bus stop, down on what is that? Elm Tree. Yeah, Elm Tree is what I was looking for. So that hadn't been talked about as an advantage, but it is to us. It means a lot to be able to help the nearest neighbors, by being able to absorb the people.
Thank you.
So I know we were just saying the motion passed as we went into that question. So I just want to give an opportunity for us to pause for a second. Are we still good with that decision, or do we want to redo anything?
You want me to redouble my motion?
I just want to make sure I give the opportunity since that question came up as I was literally saying the motion passes. So, sure. So technically, if you're talking about like the option under the NOFO to leverage healthcare resources, that would have to be a program that is COC funded through the actual COC program. But I appreciate you always trying to look for opportunities to get us more points on that application. All right, so that's a great segue into our next items on the agenda. And that would be the priority listing and the draft of the collaborative application for this year's fiscal year 23 Continuum of Care program competition. So, we had a meeting with the Program Performance and Evaluation Committee last Tuesday. Marissa and I worked to very quickly review all of those applications and engage the board in reviewing and discussing the applications received. And looking first at the priority listing, we did have 2 new applications this year. Greenhouse 17 applied for DV bonus funding, and New Beginnings applied for an expansion of their Housing First permanent supportive housing program. And so overall, we had all programs this year pass thresholds, which is positive progress for the continuum. If we were to go by rank score alone, the top scoring project would have been Greenhouse's project as a new project. Those applications tend to score a little bit higher. And so we were looking at a scenario that if we went by straight score rank, we would be placing a couple of programs down in tier 2. It would have been a portion of crisis and housing support for youth, and then the entirety of Project Independence, rapid rehousing, and shelter plus care. Some of the things that we didn't like about this scenario was that we are continually talking about the need for additional permanent supportive housing. So we had a concern about placing any permanent supportive housing programs in a position where they may not be funded. And additionally, due to the amount of funding that's going to be in tier 2 and the increases that are anticipated for fair market rent values to increase, we also didn't want to risk any of our funding that's presently in the continuum for youth. So we looked at some other scenarios. One was knowing that if we do not receive as a community a DV bonus, that program would then retain its rank, and that would come out of our overall funding. And so we considered, what if we were to place this strategically at the bottom of the priority listing, so that if we were not to receive enough funding, that the new program that's being proposed would potentially not be funded, rather than an existing program. If we do receive DV bonus, then that program will be pulled out of the ranking and not be a portion of our annual renewal funds, and all the other programs would move upward. And then the amount of that project becomes part of our annual renewal demand moving forward. The Program Performance and Evaluation Committee did not like the idea of placing at the bottom, even strategically, a program that technically was the highest scoring application. So then we looked at a different scenario where we looked at things such as unspent or recaptured funds. We've had a lot of discussions in recent years about the level of funding that's gone underspent. That has a number of impacts for the continuum. It impacts how many individuals that we're actually serving with the money that we have available to us. It also places us at jeopardy of potentially losing some funds permanently as a community in the future. And we as a community are also scored on our ability to reallocate from underperforming projects to high-performing projects. So we looked at a scenario which kept everybody pretty much in their score ranking, but really just looked at the amount of funding that had been recaptured on their most recently completed grant terms and in previous grant terms. And so we did, ultimately, that committee voted on a priority listing that would reallocate some funds from some projects that do have a history of recapture. And overall, that would be in your packet, the third scenario that was presented and then labeled as the final recommendation of the committee. We would need to go ahead and do a motion for that, and then we would also need a motion regarding the continuum of care application. I'll just go ahead and state, as for the collaborative application, this is something that we are looking to potentially time-wise approve now. We would potentially, need to make some minor changes to polish this before the final submission at the end of the month, but if we did not want to pursue a special meeting, we could go ahead and make a motion for that, with granting us the ability to make minor changes as needed to proof and finalize those attachments. So we can start with the priority listing. Would there be a motion? All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the motion passes. We will send out notification letters this afternoon and schedule debriefs with project applicants so that they can determine any changes that need to be made to their applications before the final submission. So next would be the collaborative application. We're glad to take any questions or discussions, and then there would need to be a motion for approval. I'm sure everybody read this 100+ page document in advance.
I can't believe I did. I'm like, I did.
That's why we appreciate you.
It's very unusual. I just had a few, but these are typo-y things. So sometimes it's KCADV and sometimes it's 0V, and then the greenhouse 17 thing.
Yeah, okay.
I caught those, and I'm going to get those all consistently updated to 0V.
Okay.
We had 2 people working on this. So.
Yeah, yeah.
Other questions or discussion from the board? If not, would there be a motion?
I make a motion to approve the collaborative application based on Diane having read it and understanding it. Thank you. No, seriously, I move that it be approved.
Is there a second? All right, second from TC. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the motion passes. That brings us to the last couple items on our agenda. First, I'll just make an announcement regarding our next regular meeting of the COC board. That will be Wednesday, November 8th at 1:30 here in the 3rd floor conference room of the Phoenix building. And at this time, are there any announcements or public sharing for issues not on the agenda?
I just wanted to remind everyone to please make sure that you have signed in at the sign-in sheet. Thank you.
Can I ask a question just about New Life Day Center, just as far as when the hours would be increased and how that would be, would that be communicated to us so we know when that's gonna happen?
Yeah, so what we would be looking to do internally, since we needed to move our historical funds forward anyway, they were in the year-end closeout process and gave me consent to go ahead and do that for whatever purpose it was used for. So that budget amendment is going to be going through council and should be approved around the 28th of the month. I can go ahead, since I have the board approval, and put the agreement into Legistar. We'll be looking at that agreement having an October 1 start date, with the knowledge that they would have some need to potentially, interview and hire staff and train them, but then they would be able to alert me as to how quickly they're able to do that, and we can send something out via our mailing list. We definitely want to make sure that word gets out far and wide so people know both of the hours and those other features that they're looking to put in when those are available.
Yeah, I think that I just want to say, I think on the question of like the process stuff, I don't think that I came into today knowing we were going to vote on the proposal. I know that there's an asterisk next to it that says it's a no board vote, but like the only thing in the packet is just the proposal. Like there wasn't, like even if there was just like a sentence or two in the email when you send out the board packet saying like we hope to approve this funding today. I think that would be helpful for me in the future, especially if it's something like this where, like we hadn't discussed it at a previous meeting or something like that. To my memory, yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Other announcements?
I do have an announcement. On September the 26th, we're having a press conference at the Northside Library. We're collaborating with the Catholic Action Center, and we're going to be launching Give a Kid a Home campaign.
Last call for announcements. If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, TC and Bruce have got us going out the door. Thank you all.